Dr. Julia Sadusky is a licensed clinical psychologist and the owner of a private practice in Littleton, Colorado. She is also an author, consultant, speaker, and adjunct professor. Dr. Sadusky has done extensive research and clinical work in sexual and gender development and specializes in trauma-informed care. She earned a bachelor's degree from Ave Maria University and a master's degree and doctorate in clinical psychology from Regent University. She has authored several books around human sexuality, with her most recent 2-book series entitled Start Talking to Your Kids About Sex, A Practical Guide for Catholics, and Talking to Your Teen About Sex, A Practical Guide for Catholics. Please help us welcome Dr. Julia Sadusky to the NFP podcast.
Welcome to the NFP podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, everyone.
Today, Emily and I are super excited because we have on with us a clinical psychologist, Dr. Julia Sadusky from Colorado. So welcome to the podcast, Julia.
Hi, it's so good to be with you all.
And thank you for being with us. We're super excited. So we just were talking like a second ago before we decided to kind of move into the podcast, how we wanted to frame our conversation. So for the listener, we'll start with maybe Dr. Sadusky. You can just kind of give us an intro and kind of how you got into this field and the specific psychology that you like to study and practice and what you do in your daily practice. And then we'll move into talking about how our sexuality is formed in generalities, kind of a broad, 1,000-foot view. And then we're going to go into how we can help form our children and to develop healthy sexual identities. So why don't we start with who you are, where you're from, and how you kind of got into this field?
Yeah, so I am currently a licensed psychologist in Colorado, but I grew up on the East Coast in Delaware. So I was cradle Catholic. I grew up with 6 siblings, second oldest. So not only did I have my own kind of sexual development, I had lots of siblings to witness kind of that process and how that varies person to person. But I think as far as getting into psychology, I just witnessed people I loved going to therapy when I was younger, even high school, and really saw some providers not show up very well in that space. And so honestly, it just moved me to want to be a psychologist to kind of do it better than what I was hearing about. And so I went to Ave Maria for undergrad in South Florida and studied psychology there and minored in theology. And then I went on to get my doctorate at Regent in Virginia Beach. And then my sexuality and gender. So I went to grad school in 2014, and that was kind of a very distinct cultural moment, 2014, 2015, when we really saw a shift socioculturally around gender exploration and that really coming to the forefront. And so I was already doing research in sexual orientation and that development, and then that really expanded to talking and understanding the experiences of people exploring gender questions who were Christians and Catholics. And so as time has gone on, I've gotten a lot of good training in trauma and trauma-informed care, and have just been able to witness, I think, a lot of the ways that sexual development happens for people and a lot of the gaps that are happening in sexual education in Christian families. And just about, gosh, 2, 3 years ago, it really struck me that a lot of the work I do is reactive. So after pornography exposure or after an unwanted sexual experience in childhood or 20 years after, a couple has been really struggling with sexual intimacy in a marriage and is really on the brink of divorce. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to write something in book form that's proactive, that says, what do Catholic parents need to be doing more effectively in sexual development earlier and earlier to show up for their kids and teens long before they get messaging from a lot of other perspectives. And so my most recent books have been towards that end, trying to be proactive in this area.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Emily and I tried to talk to the person who's kind of in the thick of it now, who didn't get the preventative awareness and lessons, all the information up front, and is now kind of like in that kind of conversion moment, right? Like, oh wow, and in our case, talking a lot about family planning and then, but we always say, like, but ideally, you've known this before you got engaged. You're talking about it. You are both on the same page. And so, really pushing, kind of that listener who's not yet in the thick of it to say, hey, there's stuff you can do beforehand to make that whole process of, intimacy and marriage a lot stronger and a lot more beautiful and healthy. So, that's awesome. That's really, really great. And you have your doctorate, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
What did you do your doctorate in at Regent?
A clinical psychology.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Mhm.
Did you do a focus on gender and sexuality?
So that was, yeah, that was my research area. We had
Okay.
a research institute there that I was part of, and then we ran a specialty clinic in that area.
The research institute was specifically on like gender and sexuality formation. Oh, that's so
Yes, and
cool.
specifically in religious populations. So
Oh,
it
wow.
was, all of our research was being done on Christian families, kind of, and how they're processing those experiences.
Oh, that's so interesting. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. How cool. Okay, so thank you for kind of the background, a little bit of a background. So let's, I guess, based on that, and maybe not even it can just be focused on like kind of the Christian context, but just the wider context. You said you have interacted with people or you had patients that have come to you with, gender or sexuality kind of confusion or, it's different. I don't want to say like abnormalities, but different from the binary norm that we're used to talking about, like maybe someone who has same-sex attraction, right? So is attracted to the same sex. How would you, I guess I hear like gender and sexuality and I think of the same thing. How are they different? So how would someone come to you and how would you kind of know, what are you struggling with gender? Are you struggling with your sexuality? Are you struggling with both?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's a hard one, I think, for many Catholics, because if you look at Catholic teaching and Catholic documents on um, what I think in our society we think of as gender, the term used is sexual identity. So sexual identity as male, female, is in the culture talked about as gender, as male or female, or a kind of different way of thinking about your sexed identity. So that's some of the confusion, I think, in that language. But sexual orientation captures the kind of enduring pattern of my romantic and sexual attraction. So think at puberty, we all became aware of crushes on people. Those are either in one direction or they're in another direction or they're in both directions in more minority experiences. So that's what we mean by sexual orientation is the direction and the kind of persistent pattern of my attractions. And then gender, again, it's not unrelated to sexual and romantic attraction, but it's getting at my experience of embodiment. So we are all sexed, kind of as humans, and most of us, that experience of being sexed male or sexed female is something that is not particularly troubling or even noteworthy. It's just a fact. And then there are people for whom that experience of sexed identity and embodiment as male or female is deeply painful. And that in psychology we call gender dysphoria. And then increasingly in a culture where there's kind of an expansion of categories around identity in the realm of gender. We see other labels and other terms to talk about gender identity, transgender identity, those kinds of terms emerge there.
Okay. Maybe we can focus just for a second on sexual orientation. So even just that word orientation, right? I think of like I'm orienting my desires to one thing or another. And one of the things I know I've experienced thus far as a parent is how much, I don't want to say control in like the total sense of that word. Like I have, I'm totally in control or yeah, just not totality. Okay, I'm not talking totality, but maybe influence would be a better word. As a parent, how much influence you can have in teaching your children how to orient or to what to orient certain desires, right? Like we look, when we're eating, right? Like here are things going to really nourish our body, and here are things that maybe taste good, but they don't make us feel good all the time. So we want to limit our exposure or our consumption of those things. And so that's just kind of like a simple one. But then we have the desire for our sexual desire. I have these attractions, I have these feelings, and now how do I orient them? And to me, I feel like how that comes about is a lot of like nurture. So I'm just curious, like in the conversation of nature versus nurture and how an orientation is formed in the realm of sexuality, like how much is nature versus how much is nurture? And it's interesting to hear people's take on that. There's some people who think, well, no, this is 100%, you are born with a gene for your sexual orientation. It is formed in stone. It never changes. Other people who say, no, it's completely fluid. It can just move about and be oriented in a lot of different ways, which actually I feel like I would agree more with than the like set in stone one. Um, and then there's others that I guess kind of more middle of the road of like, well, you're born with desires. And then, yes, you have a will and an intellect. And so you can manipulate, if you will, or form or direct those desires in a certain way. So I don't know if that was too much, but if you could maybe speak to that, I think that's kind of something that gets, I don't know, not talked about enough is like how much power we have over the orientation of set desire.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do get it a lot from parents. They wonder what kind of leads to an orientation, how do attractions kind of evolve into an orientation. And the most honest answer from the best of science and psychology is we don't know in any particular case. So the analogy I use is there's a lot of ways to get from the East Coast to the West Coast, and you could be in, Massachusetts, and I could wonder how you got there, and you could have gotten there by plane, you could have driven, you could have come up the coast of the East Coast, you could have come from California. So there are a lot of pathways for something as complex as sexual orientation, because there's a lot of factors at play, right? There certainly do seem to be genetic components to attraction. A lot of people who experience attraction to the same sex report very early in childhood feeling different from if there were boys, feeling different from other boys for gender-related reasons, meaning I didn't quite fit the norms that were expected of me, and girls similarly. So gender nonconformity being kind of a shared experience of these kids. And uh, that then gets responded to in a society, right, where gender conformity is kind of a value from your peers and from parents sometimes and friends. And so uh, people wonder about those kinds of interactions. And yet, there are certainly people who would talk about different environmental factors that they feel like have contributed to orientation. But I think it's maybe more helpful to think in terms of, I'm attracted to men, and if somebody was to ask me how that happened, I would not have an answer. I would say at puberty, I found myself with attractions, and they persisted in a direction over time. And so I actually appreciate the idea of being kind of humble about that we don't really know how these things come to be for any one of us. And yet, a wonderful thing about being human is I do get to, with God's help, discern and steward my attractions and my orientation. So as that's developing, for instance, and I'm a teenager, the best of secular psychology agrees that it's great to not be sexually active in the teenage years because that has an impact on us in a lot of areas, including kind of how we see ourselves and understand ourselves over time. So I think sexual stewardship is a really interesting principle for me when it comes to navigating orientation, even more so than understanding kind of how a person develops an orientation, because I think a lot of parents have a lot of anxiety about what do we need to do to kind of point orientation in one direction or another. And I think we have less control over that than we would like to believe, although there are some interesting theories out there that would say if you do this and you don't do that, uh, you'll guarantee this or that path. And you know this as parents, this is true for a lot of parenting right now, that there's these promises that if you do X and don't do Y, this outcome will happen. And I think it's much better to focus on the particular relationships you have with your children, know these experiences they may or may not have, and help them appreciate that God has a real beautiful plan for their lives, kind of in the direction that they find themselves in when it comes to attraction.
All that makes a lot of sense. I think I've just been very interested lately in hearing from maybe individuals who have lived pursuing their same-sex attraction lifestyles, who have then decided, through processes of conversions, that they're not, and different practicing psychologists about the impact of their opposite and same-sex gender parent in their home in the way that they viewed their own sexuality and their sexual identity growing up. And maybe that's different than, what we're talking about with sexual orientation, but I guess I just find that interesting. Not that as a parent, I recognize I have very little control over lots of things as a parent. And at the same time, I know I have a profound influence on my children. And so things that I say and things that I don't say and how I say those things can have a lasting impact on them. And I believe you mentioned in your intro too that you work with trauma, and parents, whether we like it or not, can be the sources of trauma sometimes. And so I think that, well, I understand what you're saying, that like we shouldn't, be too fixated on like every little thing we say or do, and are we going to influence this in our kids? You know, there is like, if we figure that like, this child maybe does not have like the gender norm interests. Like I have boys. One of my boys might be really interested in ballet. Well, if like my husband just totally neglects him and thinks that's just so weird and makes comments about it, right? That's not going to like be helpful in his formation of his identity as a man, as opposed to just saying like, great, you like ballet. You're still a boy. Like, and just, like most people that like ballet, like you're going to be with a lot of girls, but there are really great male ballerinas too. So does it make sense? I guess what I'm trying to say is like I think while we don't want to get bogged down with it, we do have a lot of influence and sway over our children with how we respond to those very personal, sensitive topics like sexuality and the feelings that we have. And maybe Emily, you can speak to this, or Dr. Sadusky, if you have experiences from your childhood. I have to say this one thing I'm very grateful for from my childhood. My mom handled all topics related to periods, feelings, attractions, any questions I had with such gentleness and openness, and wasn't afraid of any question I had, no matter how afraid I was to ask of it. It's just everything I felt was normal and it was okay and nothing to be scared of. And I'm just eternally grateful for it, because while I have my own stuff, like that was never a source of fear or confusion. So anyway, that might have been a little bit of a ramble, but does it make sense what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
that does. Yeah. And I hear you as far as I do think there's people, especially right now, speaking out about some of those causal theories and kind of how they attribute their own sexual journey and kind of the ways they make sense of that in hindsight. And I think it's always so interesting to hear, right? All of those different perspectives that exist. As a psychologist, I'm always going to speak to the research, and the research has been really disappointing in these areas, that it has really not held up to any kind of causal pathway that a lot of people pontificate about. And so, what I think you're speaking to, especially in that case of your own experience with your mom, is the key for you is actually having a place you could go to talk about these things, right? And trusting that the adults in your life could receive you and handle your experience, and that it wasn't too big for them to receive. And I think interestingly, in the realm of sexual attraction development, people with same-sex attraction usually wait about 5 years from first attraction to sharing with a parent about these experiences. And so I think that tells us something, right? That the challenge is so often communication and parents kind of feeling like they're in a good position to receive this information, and young people feeling like I can bring mom and dad into this part of my story earlier when I'm beginning to ask these questions. And that's a really important piece, I think, of parenting, is being the type of person who your teen knows can receive these questions as they come up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that maybe can segue into, I'd like to hear a little bit about some of the research that you found and just kind of studying the Christian culture in particular, the parenting culture and the formation of sexuality and sexual identity. Because I think that that's, something I definitely, I think Emily and I have talked about this too for her as well. Please chime in, Emily. But like, this growing up with, there's the cross, but like, well, it's not really great to have a cross though. Like everyone has a cross, but you shouldn't like really have a cross. And if you do, you don't want to like talk about it or like make a big deal about it because Jesus has redeemed the cross. And so really everything should be great. And so it felt like such a confusing message because it's like, I'm really struggling with something, but oh, I shouldn't be struggling with something. Maybe I'm not praying hard enough. Am I not a good Christian? What's going on here? I've gotten too into the world. I mean, it can make you a little bit crazy. And I just feel so strongly that, I want my boys to know. I feel like my mission as a parent, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Sadusky, but I feel like one of my missions as a parent is to help my boys in a way like discover their cross and embrace it and carry it gracefully and not be ashamed or afraid of it and know that there is redemption in Christ and everyone has a cross and it's okay. And I'm here to help you with yours. I'm here to help carry yours. Does that make sense? So, yeah. So I guess like, you know, in the world of Christian families, like, is that kind of like a common thing? Is that how we view, maybe the formation of sexuality, the struggle that comes with that in the teen years as we're trying to navigate this and figure this out, and then even into adulthood, as we're trying to live that out? Or is it, is there still a lot of like, this is an awkward conversation. I don't really know what to talk about. And we're just going to kind of not talk about it and just say, don't have sex until marriage and being gay is sinful. I don't know. I mean, that sounds like so
Yeah, it's such a
simple and
great
like,
question.
yeah, go
It's
ahead.
not an oversimplification. I think it's an accurate commentary. Yes, thank you for your honesty too, and what that's really like, right? I think hypothetically, every parent would say that first part of like, I want to be able to help my kids carry whatever it is they're carrying. And I think we actually like the idea of a cross. I think it's been my experience in my life, and I've been blessed in my life that I've had many crosses in my life and several in different realms of whether it's intimacy or sexuality or, family or whatever, relationships, all these things are challenges for us as human beings. And so I think hypothetically, parents, when it's abstract, are wanting to be the type of parent who can accompany through the crosses of life and want to equip a young person in these ways. What I witness in families around sexuality broadly and specific to what we've been talking about with sexual orientation is when it's my child, a lot of times parents want to delay any conversation as long as possible because they feel so ill-equipped. So I've been struck after I wrote these two books by how many parents say to me, I've never heard anybody say what you said in these books. And I think, I didn't know it was particularly groundbreaking, but it kind of speaks to the lack of modeling in these areas. That it's one thing to say, I want to be able to talk about sexuality with my teen. It's another thing to have words for that. It's another thing to have an image of what my face is doing when they say, Mom, I think I'm gay. Like, and it's another thing to feel whatever emotions come up. If I've heard that parents make cause their child's attraction pattern, well, then I feel guilty and I feel ashamed and then I feel grief and then I feel overwhelmed and wow. So then all of that tends to come out sideways, right? In the moment. And maybe I avoid and I acknowledge my child in that moment, but I never bring it up again. Or maybe I become angry and upset and I look back on that with regret. So I think the biggest deficit I'm seeing is the lack of modeling of effective ways to actually talk um, with your children and teens and to receive what they're giving you in a regulated way. And so I think that's more boots on the ground what I see happening. And yeah, this is part of why your work is so important. This is part of why what I'm doing feels important is we're trying to elevate a conversation and say it's not just believing a Catholic vision of human sexuality, it's being able to articulate accurate scientific information with a 13-year-old in a language they can understand.
And would you say that your books would be such a great starting point for any parent? I feel like that is so common. I hear that all the time, where parents desire to have conversations with their teens or their kids, but they get really held up in the not knowing of what they're going to say. If they say that, I mean, it's just they get in their head. And so then it doesn't happen, I think.
That's right.
And so it sounds like your books can really give just some general talking points, probably, to help parents feel confident.
That's right. The way I did it was just scripting, and it really came out of getting calls from friends and then talking with parents I was meeting with who I would tell them, here's what you say. And then they would go home and they'd come back and they'd say, I didn't say it. And then it was, okay, let's talk about the barriers. What's getting in the way? So the first chapter in both books that I wrote is, what are the barriers? What's getting in the way? Look at your own sexual story. Look at your own messaging that you got about these things. And how does that come up then when you try to say out loud words for male and female genitalia, for instance, to a young child? Well, you're going to be hit with shame if your experience of that was clouded in shame. And so, really, then just scripting throughout the book, here are some ways you could talk about X, Y, and Z, body boundaries, sleepovers, and boundaries at sleepovers, or here's how you might respond if your teen says somebody touched them in a way that didn't feel safe. I mean, just kind of trying to give a script while acknowledging there's lots of ways to do this well. The best way to do it is by starting, and then you get to model humility if you mess up or you don't know the answer, and you get to say, "That's a great question. I'll circle back next time. I really got to do some research. It's a great question for mom. You stumped me there." I mean, we want to create an environment where parents are seen as a resource who doesn't have to know everything, but does have to have a little bit of a roadmap for even just some conversation starters. So that really is what these books are about.
Yeah, I will link to the books, by the way, for everyone in the show notes if you want to go and check them out. I think that it's interesting how Emily and I came to NFP with our own infertility stories. And I think I don't know, Emily, if you would say, like, found a lot of healing personally through this experience of learning about my body, about bringing it into my marriage and applying that.
Absolutely.
Just so much healing that can come, kind of unexpectedly, right? We just thought, I just want to learn how to get pregnant. I want to learn why my body's not doing this so we can get pregnant.
Right.
And how much healing I think can come from that and knowing that information. And then seeing now having children, how much that healing can now be generational, and passing that on to my children so that, because the Lord has healed me in certain areas, thanks be to God, I now feel comfortable to broach these topics with my children, and I don't have any shame. Thanks be to God, I don't have any shame. And I hope that that should be a message of great hope, because I'm no one special. Emily's no one special. Like we're no one special. This is what God wants to do for everyone. God wants healing and restoration, because especially for the parents, because you are now stewards of these souls that God has given you. And it's so interesting, I think, kind of hierarchically speaking, right? We think parents are above children. And it's humbling to think that through these children, God is healing me through my parenting experience. And that is humbling and beautiful at the same time, when, I can be humble enough to receive it and say, wow, like this relationship with you and helping you form and entering into that vulnerability of my own woundedness and experience is just going to make this so much better for you. So maybe for parents to hear that too is like, when you embark on a journey of healing of your own, whatever sexual experiences you've had in the formation, and Dr. Sadusky, correct me if I'm wrong here, okay? But like when you embark on that healing and you allow that process to take place and unfold, it's just going to make your relationship with your children and your ability to be there to listen and be unafraid of whatever they come at you with so much better, so much better when we can be free of that shame that comes with whatever, befalls us. So,
That's so beautiful and it's so true. I mean, even sometimes I think of the parents that have come and brought their teenager to see me for any number of reasons, right? And the parent has never gone to therapy and would have never considered it. But let's say for whatever set of reasons, they become witness to the healing in their teen, that depression is better and that child is more self-aware and their communication skills are improving. And sometimes I'll get an email from the parents, hey, can I come to therapy? And we get them a referral because they see the value of looking at their own story and looking at their own history. And I think your point's such a good one, that we want our kids to be reflective, but sometimes we try to short circuit that. We try to control their reflection as opposed to saying, why don't I look at my own story? And of course, the crosses we carry are often invitations to look at that for ourselves.
I feel like so much of this goes back to trust, right? Like the trust between the child and the parent. And that starts at such a young age. Like that's so formative just in, I'm trusting you're going to feed me kind of thing, like as a child. And like you just keep building on that trust. And I would hope that as the child gets older, no matter what happens, I would hope my biggest goal would be that my kids would trust that I'm not going to know everything, that I'm not going to know what's right in all situations. But if something happens, just to trust that we're going to figure it out. Like this is not, and that we don't have to be scared. And so I think that that's my biggest thing, I think, for parents. Just don't be scared of any topics. Like there's just like Amy said, there's going to be crosses no matter what. Your children might not figure out their cross till they're outside of your home, and that's another thing. But if something happens in the home, don't be scared. God has a plan. Like all of it is going to be used for his glory in some way, shape, or form, even the really traumatic things that could possibly happen. And so I just really feel like so much goes back to just that relationship and that openness to just figure there are resources. I'm so glad that you've written these books. I'm so glad.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I always tell parents to say to their teens when they make these disclosures of any kind, as you as a parent are feeling terrified and are feeling overwhelmed, if you say one thing, say, oh my gosh, there's a lot more we're going to have to talk about, and we don't have to do that today. But for now, I just want you to know there is nowhere else I'd rather you go than to me with that information. So thank you. It's such a compliment. And to be able to pull for that confidence of what you're describing of like, we will figure this out is so relieving for children to say,
Yes.
we are smart people and there are other smart people who can help us figure this out.
Yes, because God willing, you want your kids to come to you and not the person at school. Or, I mean, like they may trust a friend, but you hope that they trust you, initially to bring all that. That's, yeah.
this conversation is very timely because I've been struggling with something a little bit this week. I have been observing at there's like a community, specific community in the summer that we participate with at like a local aquatic center. And there are these young teens, like 14, and they're dating. I'm using air quotes here, people. They're dating, which I just think is somewhat laughable at 14. But anyway, they're dating and they're like all over each other. Okay. And anyway, the parents of both of these people know each other, but they have a very, again, air quotes, like hands off approach. Like the approach is, and maybe this is something we can talk about because it's something that I'm just like, like there's like a fire in me, Dr. Sadusky. I'm just like, no, I see these little kids, these two 14-year-olds, this little scrawny, skinny 14-year-old boy, and this girl who's not scrawny and skinny. She's quite voluptuous and has already gone through puberty. Okay. And they're like rubbing on each other by the pool, which I'm just like, this is just a violation of the modesty rules at the pool. But anyway, this is happening. And my initial inside is just like, these kids, by this behavior, they're screaming for direction. They have these very strong desires and they don't know what the heck to do with them. So they're doing what the world is telling them to do. They're doing whatever feels good. And I'm just like, parents, where are you? Like, we gotta help direct them. Like, they feel something, like, affirm it. This is a great feeling. And we don't rub up against the other 14-year-old person. Like, that's not the answer to this feeling, you know? So anyway, I just, I'm like talking to my husband to the like to death about this. He's like, Amy, you need to let this go. You're not the parent, and it doesn't matter. But I'm just like, it just makes me so sad. That's really it. Like, I just feel so sad. It's just like a waste of an opportunity of like youth too. I'm like, you are 14. There's so much other stuff you could be doing. You have so many talents and gifts. Like, you are single and young and full of life. Like, go do stuff. Like, don't waste your time on this crap right now. So anyway, that being said, I guess in, your first book, the most recent book, I think, right, is Start Talking to Your Kids About Sex. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. The practical guide for Catholics. And even if you're not Catholic, I imagine you could get a lot from the book. But it does have that Catholic worldview of human sexuality, is that there is a guide to this. And I think that's maybe something important. While you say there are a lot of paths from the East Coast to the West Coast, there is an end that we're going for, though. Like, there isn't multiple ends. There is one end that we're aiming for. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Like, what is it that we want in the end? For what is the glory of God is man fully alive. What does it look like for man to be fully alive in this realm of human sexuality?
Yeah, it's a question. I do think I mentioned this earlier, but this idea of sexual stewardship is such a fascinating one for me because it applies to all of us. I think sometimes people think, oh, chastity applies to dating, or chastity applies to marriage, or we kind of think of it in these insulated circles. But this idea of we steward our finances, and we also are called to steward our bodies. And we're also in some ways co-responsible for other people's bodies. Like, if I see a friend being mocked and ridiculed as their body's changing at puberty, I want to teach my kids to be the type of Catholic kids who would stand up for that friend and say, that's such a weird thing to comment on their breasts. That's weird to say that. Leave them be. Their body's changing. Yours is too. To be able to coach those things, I think, is part of stewardship. It's part of many virtues, including chastity, but isn't exclusive to chastity. And so I think the goal is helping young people, and this may feel so simple, but to have a relationship with Christ where they actually trust him like they're learning to trust you, right? In the unknowns, in the questions they have about sexuality, in the muddy waters of sexual development, where let's say they find themselves masturbating and they didn't know what that was, and then they kind of feel good within that and build a habit around it, and then you see it as a parent and you're trying to intervene on that, that the goal is actually not perfect teenagers who are compliant. The goal is actually a capacity to turn to Christ and to grow in Christ likeness, which involves humility, which involves repentance, which involves kind of growing in honesty and transparency. It involves a sense of justice for myself and other people. So I may step away from pornography use, not because it's bad to, it's plain and simple, but actually because the people being shown in pornography are being used as entertainment. And that matters to me. They're not here for my entertainment. And so building out those kinds of qualities in young people, we forget that we kind of ask so little of them a lot of the time. This is something that's very interesting to me. I think we forget that so many saints died in their 20s and they became saints through their adolescence. And we have these radical testimonies of virtue. And so to not expect so little of our young people, to your point about that story at the pool, that, I think sometimes we look at those young people and they say, oh, they'll grow out of it, or, oh, they're just being young. But to be able to say to a young man, like, hey, she's actually like not um like a wall for you to scratch your back up against. Like she's actually a person. And she might like you to ask her questions about herself. And you may actually, if you're honest, you may actually care to be known by her as well. And seeing and knowing somebody is what relationships are for. And to be honest with you both, I actually, with many of my teens, they'll talk about love. They'll wonder what love is. And I always use the John Paul II quote, to love is to will the good of another for their own sake. And I use it with secular clients as much as Christian clients, and everybody loves it. All these teens that say, oh, that's like water in the desert. Who said that? They'll say. And so I think being able to recognize that an authentic Catholic vision of sexuality is a humanizing vision in a culture that is very dehumanizing of young people in a particular way. And so I think Christ-likeness, virtue in all its forms, stewardships of our bodies and of other people's bodies, that I actually am responsible to the people in my life. My behaviors and actions do impact other people. They also impact how I see other people. Um, and being able to be really honest with teens about these things. They're getting inundated with information, and we're so worried about overexposing. And I think in doing so, we often under respond and forget that they are being exposed to a lot without our consent.
Oh, yes, for sure. I think that I found a little bit of peace with the pool incident and the young people was knowing like, well, I can pray for them. And then also like the parents are giving what they have. Like I have to trust that, right? So we can only give what we have and what we know and what we're comfortable with again. So the importance of our our parents being willing or being in a space given the grace from God to heal and to say, I'm not just going to chalk it up to, oh, they're just being teens. I just hate that. Ugh, I hate that statement with a passion. Like, no, you know what? I meant really great teens who are
Yes.
just doing great things and they're great people. Like, it's not just all teens are doing stupid stuff. Like, that doesn't have to be the case at all. So, okay, so kind of I'd like to turn a little bit because this is something that Emily and I have talked about, I think quite frequently actually on this podcast. And that's within the Christian culture and community about sexuality, this idea of abstinence before marriage. And I'd like to hear your thoughts and your experiences in the clinical setting about the messaging of abstinence and whether that is, you know, the best way to approach teaching our young people about the appropriate context for our sexual desire. And let me just kind of frame this a little bit in a context of, we've worked with women and couples, and I know I have people close to me that I also think form these beliefs or have had these beliefs where before we get married, we have these desires and they're strong desires and they recognize that they're good and that God gave them to them. But we're kind of white knuckling it, right? Like we're waiting until we get married and then it's kind of a free for all. Like this is now I'm in the stadium. I am playing the game and I get a free for all. Like this is where like I feel like I want to have sex. Your body is my body is your body. We just have this free for all access to one another. And it's like a lack of the concept of chastity, that even within the context of marriage, which is what makes, I think, Catholic teaching, especially in the realm of married sexuality, a challenge for perhaps more of our Protestant brothers and sisters, hard, is that we say, well, no, even within marriage, we still have to see the other as a gift and as someone to be highly respected and not as someone that we just now get to use because we have this ring on our finger and they're meant to be there to fulfill our desire. So I'd like to hear what you think about, that message of abstinence for young people, and whether or not that's the best way that we should be approaching it. And, the term is it is a good term, and there does require periods of abstaining, of not engaging in a behavior. But if it's lacking in something, because it's also has led to, again, we've encountered this like different levels, I think, of a little bit of an abuse of our desire to say, well, yeah, in this setting, she owes you things. And usually it's in that way. It's not usually a two-way thing. It's usually she owes the man this because he has a stronger desire, which, my understanding of Catholic teaching is that that's totally, we should reject that completely. She doesn't owe you sex.
Mhm.
He doesn't owe you sex. That's not how it works. So yeah, any thoughts, I guess, about that,
Yes.
Messaging of abstinence when it's appropriate, where it's not, etc.
Yeah, it's such a good question. So, certainly the principle of abstinence is relevant to relationships, right? With many types of things we abstain from in seasons. Fasting is this way. We don't fast because the thing we fast from is bad. We fast because we recognize it builds a character of self. It builds an awareness of my capacity to make sacrifices for the good of myself and the world. It also brings us to limitations of ourselves and it humbles us and recognizing the need for grace, the need for God's help in these spaces. And so the idea of abstinence is just a fine principle. I think with teenagers, the way that gets applied is it gives them exactly what not to do with their desires. And for teenagers who are rebellious, that's a bit of a challenge, accepted moment. And then for teens who are compliant, the narrative is often if you follow these rules and you say no, 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 then you get to have whatever you want later. And the thing that you get, the gift that you get from God for good behavior, will be like the best thing. And so it creates really unrealistic expectations for sexual intimacy, which is its own learning of a language of the body. And a gift is meant to be given and received, not taken at will. If you saw something a person had, and because you were really nice to somebody yesterday, you thought you could just take the gift, that would be called stealing, not chastity and not love. And so I think there's a lot of distortions that happen in just an emphasis on what not to do. And teenagers really need to know, number one, what do I do with desires? So when I'm attracted to somebody, when I'm aroused, what does that feel like? How do I know that's happening? And what do I do with it? So they need an adequate understanding of it, even just how the body responds to beauty, and that if nothing is done, my body will calm down. And that is a good skill set for adult men and adult women, priests, religious, men who are married, women who are married, that if I do nothing, my body will calm down and I will be okay. And so I think helping frame to young people, the reason we're teaching abstinence is to help you be a mature adult who can manage sexual arousal in a honoring way. I mean, and that's just self-control. It's just wisdom. It's uh, self-discipline. It's respect of the other. So that's a really critical skill. But we forget that when teens are dating, they need to be taught how to exercise this skill. So it's one thing to say, I will not have sex with you. It's another thing to wonder, but what happens when we're moving towards that point of inevitability because of stimulation? And we don't even know that that inevitability point exists where orgasm is likely, for instance. And so teens are not being taught really a lot of what they need to be effective in abstinence. And so a lot of times in therapy, I work with young people, teenagers, and college students who are dating that, okay, if you're saying you want to not have sex, tell me about all the things you're gonna do to make that possible. Tell me the times of day that you're gonna not be in certain areas of the world and like not be in the dark. And when you're tired, when that makes it a lot harder to set boundaries. And just really mapping some of those scenarios for them. So it's not just about not doing something, it's about what am I doing? And then that builds qualities of character and skill sets that then in marriage are translatable, where a woman can say to a man, wouldn't you know that for a certain amount of time after I have a baby, we're not going to be having sex? And so I need to know in dating that when you are aroused by me and stimulated, that you're going to be able to ride that wave and not make me feel guilty if we don't go past a certain point. Teaching about your body and how it works and how the reproductive system works actually builds the confidence to say, here's what I'm looking for in a man of character, and vice versa, for a man to be able to expect, of a wife to be able to not, manipulate in these areas or kind of tit for tat. And to be able to, for a wife to be able to learn to communicate about her own body and her own desires, and to learn that that's a good thing, that it's not just a guy thing to desire intimacy. But there are different ways that we long for that, and different things that move us in the direction of healthy sexual intimacy.
For sure. Emily and I talk a lot about a right size expectations. And that so much rides on expectations and how often we enter into marriage, even with, pre-Cana formation. And in our case, right, like you're learning about natural family planning. So you're learning about the biological markers and complementarity and how, fertility works, et cetera. But do you know, like you said, like postpartum, there is going to be like the time where intercourse is just literally physically not possible. Like she is healing from birth, she's recovering, she has a new baby, nursing, probably not very interested right now, like the way her hormones are. And I think I want to because I think they deserve a lot of credit. Men are able to digest this information. And I think a lot of the times they just don't know. They just, because they're not women. And
Correct.
even to be fair, a lot of women don't know what to expect because they haven't been through that process either of pregnancy and motherhood and those seasons of life. And so, as much, we're just all about like prevention, like as much as we can set right size expectations heading into that situation doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make that time when you get there like super easy, but at least you would have known like somewhere in the time leading up to this, like someone planted a seed to say like, oh, that's right. This woman like 4 years ago in pre-Cana mentioned like, hey, this is going to be a challenging time. And it is a challenging time. And how can we move through that? And that's where we talk about sexuality is so much deeper than just the physical, right? There's intimacy. How can we connect in other ways, knowing that that season of physical intimacy, it will return. It's just right now, it's not here. And we don't have to go live on separate ends of the house. We don't have to be manipulative and angry and working through those things together as a couple so that we can still find that real closeness. And I really believe in my experience and in working with couples, there can be really great intimacy in those moments when we embrace it and we haven't been formed in kind of that abstinence messaging of, well, this is my right. I should be able to do this. And I think that's where we do find in some cases, I would say in our Protestant maybe context with some of our Protestant brothers and sisters, but even in Catholic settings too, where, well then enters, condom use and barrier use and birth control use of like, I have this right. And so, for me to achieve this right, this end of, intercourse with you, then we should use this method because that's going to let us get there. And it's not good for us to not engage in that for a length of time. So we should just use whatever means we can so that we can connect physically. And, Catholic teaching on sexuality would say that's actually not going to be the best for your marriage and for your relationship. So, I have a question actually because I haven't read your book. I'm very interested in getting it though and reading it. The Practical Guide for Catholics about starting to talk to your kids about sex. Do you go through different age spans? Because, do you? Okay, because that's something, right now we have littles. I have 4-year-olds, twin 4-year-olds, and Emily and I've talked about this with our own kids, an 8.5-year-old. And, my boys, my twins will even, well, they'll wake up and their genitalia, their penis will be in a certain state. And they find it so fascinating, and mommy, what is this doing? Like, just like, it's very detached. Like, why is it like this, And I'll say, well, you have blood vessels there. When you wake up in the morning, this is, kind of what can happen. And they're like, oh. And so they find it very interesting. And they'll, sometimes they'll bring it up at inopportune times that I wish they wouldn't bring it up when
Of
we're with
course.
other people. But nonetheless, they're interested and they want to know and they like learning about it. And I think it really helps kind of not, again, just rejecting any kind of shame about it, that this is just kind of biology. Like this is just what your body's going to do, regardless of what you do or what your desires are or anything. This is just kind of how male biology works. So yeah, in your book, do you kind of go through stages for parents of like how to do this when they're little, how to do this? I know you have a specific book about teens, but prior to the teenage years, do you break it down or do you focus on a specific kind of time?
Yeah, so the way I wrote it was that first book is start talking to your kids about sex, and then the teen book is talking with your teen about sex. So it's kind of similar, but that first book, every chapter is really, think developmentally. So that first chapter is just teaching very young children about genitalia terms. So accurate terminology around male and female genitalia and body parts is protective against sexual harm in early childhood. So that's the first principle. And you can do that. I always say like 0 to 3. A baby is not going to remember you saying, "Hey, I'm going to clean under the shaft of your penis." But you as a parent will reduce your shame by saying that out loud to an and then as they get 3, they will now know those terms. And so that's that first age range. And then I just kind of build developmentally from there. So exploratory play, right, is 3 to 5, where they're using their body as a almost like a source of learning, curiosity, and play through the sensory touch. And so this is where games of doctor come in, or kids noticing their bodies and their genitalia and the opposite sex genitalia. And parents often respond to this out of their own shame and anxiety. So I coach through that and give the age ranges of that. And then we talk about body boundaries, privacy is 6, 7 as they get older, erections. You mentioned that, those happen in utero and they continue to happen, and they're not tied to sexual arousal until puberty. That's not possible until puberty unless they're harmed. So being able to, yes, give that language of, yes, blood rushes to the tip of your penis and it makes it stick up and out. And that is what's happening there. What questions do you have, right? And just helping, or as kind of cervical mucus and discharge for young girls as they move towards puberty. So yeah, I just try to offer age ranges. And of course, these are all ranges that vary based on, you know, other developmental factors, neurodivergence being one of them. You kind of have to adjust based on different pieces. But I do try to give age ranges that are relevant for that early childhood range. And then teenage years, same thing. What are the things you have to do right before puberty as they're starting to move in that direction? And then what do you do in the early teen years, late teen years is how that book's laid out.
I feel like this is exactly what parents want and need. This is amazing. I just never knew about these books. I can't wait
Well,
to
they're
order.
new. So
Oh, they
last
are
2 years,
new?
yeah,
Okay. Oh,
they're pretty
wonderful.
new, thankfully. So, and I
Wonderful.
should say this too. I'm actually right now. There's going to be a video series. It's going to be available to parents for the teen book to just try to coach through, again, kind of short modules. And then there's going to be actually a handbook attachment that will just let parents journal through some of the principles of the teen book and also have literal handouts of like, this is male and female genitalia. Look at how that fits. And just kind of letting parents have access to information that some of which they can put in front of their teens, some of which they can, fill out with their teens, and some of which is just for the parents in their own journeys. So people following my work will see those rolling out here soon.
That's
Oh, that's
beautiful because
fantastic.
Amy was just bringing this up on a recent podcast about the desire. She has such a desire for information specific because there is some information for young girls, and so this sounds like it'll be good for both. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about it for sure.
That's fantastic. Thank you for doing that work. That's going to be super helpful. Yeah, send us an email when you have that out so we can start sharing that with people and let them know, hey, this is out now. So definitely go check it out. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think how maybe we can bring this to a close and wrap it up. I feel like I could just keep talking about this.
I know. I know.
I'm
It's so
so
fun to talk to you
interested in
both.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just really find this just so interesting. So maybe we could end with, I guess, anything that we haven't talked about that you really would like to talk about, maybe that you thought about coming into this podcast with it or in mind. But really, I guess, giving a lot of encouragement with parents. I think what I've heard you say, and correct me if this is not a good summary, but you know, the wrong way to do this is to not do it at all. And it's better to just kind of start. And if you fumble, you go back and you apologize, or you find the right resource, but to at least just let your kids know, like, even if you feel uncomfortable, like, I do want to be the person to share this information with you and to talk about it with you and to be here to answer your questions or field your concerns or your needs. I do find it interesting and a little sad that should a child, teen feel, any type of same-sex attraction, that it would take them 5 years to share with their parents. I'm curious if like, is that dependent upon the home culture? Is that just kind of across the board? Is that just, personal shame that really you can't control, kind of how they handle that, especially in I guess I'm surprised to hear that too, in our culture that is so like whatever you feel, all your desires, you can be I don't know, I feel like there's like a million different gender identities you can have now, that maybe people would still feel a sense of shame? Or is that kind of statistic specifically related to like Christian homes and Christian communities?
Yeah, that data is specific to Christian homes.
Okay.
It's pulling from data from Christian college students who kind of reflect back on the milestone events, and they're disclosing um, on average 5 years after first attraction. And you bring up all the relevant questions as to why. And some of that people report is shame. A lot of it has to do with the way we talk about homosexuality around children. So if the sense is homosexual people ruined marriage, for instance, and gay people are sinful, and those are the only narratives that get told, then the sense is gay bad. I'm gay. Who can I tell? Nobody. It really is that simple calculus in a young teen, especially if they can tell their parents become upset with gay characters on TV or gay celebrities. If the reactions of parents are ones of disgust or anger, which is usually fear coming out sideways, then the young person clocks that as oh gosh, I don't want to make my parent upset, so I'm not going to tell them this thing that might be that thing. And so that's a lot of I think what's happening there. Ultimately, um, the encouragement I would give to parents listening is a lot of times when I speak to parents, they remind me that by the time they get this information, it feels like it's too late. They
Mm,
have 18-year-olds, they have 14-year-olds. They didn't do all of this. They didn't, that beautiful story you told about your sons and teaching them about erections. They didn't do that. And now they're feeling guilty, and now they're feeling like a failure, and now they're feeling like it's all for naught. And to your point, what I recommend to these parents is a very simple thing. After you listen to this, sometime in the next few days, if you're driving in the car or going for a walk with your kid, you can say to them, hey, I just want to acknowledge that we've never really talked about sexuality. And when we have, mom's like reacted to something, or dad has kind of swatted your hand away from your vagina when you were touching it in public.
mm,
And we've really not done a good job of that.
mm,
And we're learning more about how to do a better job. So moving forward, we're going to have more conversations than we've had in the past. And I just want you to know that I'm doing my research to be a parent who can show up for you in that, because sexuality is an important part of life. What would that be like for you if we started talking more about that? And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the ways that we've kind of left you to do that alone. Those moments are so healing. They're so transformative. And nobody comes in my office and says, my parent genuinely apologized for blank, and I can't forgive them. Like, so the power of a parent taking ownership and responsibility, accountability for the impact of those moments, and then saying, I'm going to move forward differently, which is what guilt is for. It's for learning how to do it differently. I think can give a lot of parents hope that it's not too late. If you have a 20-year-old or a 14-year-old or an 8-year-old, there's plenty of opportunity to be a safe person in these spaces for your kids and teens, and they will not get from other people what they need and deserve from you.
that's excellent.
That is so touching. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, very encouraging. Before we wrap, let's talk about your other two books really quickly. Please plug those so we can share those with other people too. So one of the other ones is called Gender Identity and Faith: Clinical Postures, Tools, and Case Studies for Client-Centered Care. I'm assuming, is that more for the clinician population?
Yeah, that's for clinicians. Some pastors like it. Anybody who's walking with people in the realm of gender questions and gender dysphoria, that's a good resource for therapists and for pastors. It was written for Christian and non-Christian therapists, so it kind of casts a wide net of how you work with religious populations in the realm of gender. And then the first book I wrote with Mark Yarhouse was Emerging Gender Identities, Understanding the Diverse Experiences of Today's Youth. And that's really trying to capture some of the expanding categories around gender and what does a faithful Christian need to know as far as a crash course to understand that landscape and then to effectively minister and walk with teens in this space. And this fall in October, we'll be having a book come out called Emerging Sexual Identities, which is really kind of mirror book for sexual orientation and faith. So, how do we walk with teens, asking questions around sexual orientation and faith in the current cultural climate where there are a lot of expanding categories available to them? How do we not react out of fear and anger, but calm and clarity and courage in these spaces with our young people?
I guess I have another question or thought that I'd like to hear your feedback on. I think I can hear a lot of perhaps like maybe an older generation, and even I'm, tempted to think this too a little bit, where I feel like, and you're so well spoken and so gentle and so, nuanced and not black and white about this of like, there's lots of things that we don't know. Very humble, right? Like there's lots of things we don't know. There are things we do know though. Like there is a true north. And we do want to work towards that. But there's a lot of different experiences that people have, young people and adults. So we want to be sensitive to that. But I have heard, and again, I could maybe ascribe to this at some point too, where I'm like, okay, like this is just like a lot, and there's just like you're male or you're female. Like, do we really need to be so like, how are you feeling and how did you get there? And it's like, no, you're a boy. You're a boy who likes something that girls traditionally like, but you're still a boy. Like, move on. We don't need to like really do a deep dive. Um, what do you say to that, or what would be kind of your response? And it seems as though that approach just would not fit this moment because it seems like this moment is just so full of confusion and so many voices saying so many different things that just wouldn't hold right now. So yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I don't know about you all. I grew up going to Catholic school, and the analogy I use for this is I feel like at the time that I was being raised in Catholic school, I don't know if it's quite the same today. We were kind of taught the faith in a way that we knew all the right answers. And most of us walked away from the faith when we left Catholic school. Because spiritual formation is not about having the right answer. It's about having a relationship with a God who wrestles with us, who cares to be in the nitty-gritty with us, and is not offended or put off when we are all over the map in any given day and when our emotions pull us in different directions. And so I actually think what we've learned in spiritual development and teaching the faith applies to what I'm offering in terms of gender, which is if all we do is cognitively dispute people and give them it very well might be the right answer. Like a teen says, I don't believe in God. And we say, well, let me tell you about Aquinas's 5 proofs of the existence of God. Well, we're right. But most teenagers are expressing, and I don't believe in God, that like, I don't trust God. I don't think God likes me. I don't think God loves me. Or does he care when I'm suffering? Or why did my grandma die? Like they're asking questions of theodicy. And if that's what the question is about, well, we're going to answer it very differently. And so I think authentic accompaniment, which I think was a spiritual insight that came to, yes, this cultural moment, but I think a broader commentary on how we've kind of approached education more broadly, which is if we just give them the right answer, they're going to be on the right path. And we found that conversion is about a heart that feels seen and known by God. And the way people come to know God is by being seen and known by us, and perhaps being surprised by our patience, as we all are probably with God. Like, you're really still like me here. And so I think that's what I would offer is I think a lot of times we take shortcuts because we want to be efficient because it feels like a distraction or a waste of time. And um, the truth of it is God just doesn't operate that way with you and me. And so I think we model something really beautiful when we offer that same grace that we've been given in faith to these young people. Um, and we can have all of our kind of reactions to this, and I think those are fair. I have my own, and uh, yeah, to be able to look at somebody and to really reflect that level of patience and spiritual maturity that says God's looking for you while you're still a long way off, um, is not something repeatable in our culture. And I think young people will follow the Lord when they encounter God who's very different than any of the humans who give them all kinds of answers for who they are.
Oh, that's so excellent. Yeah, I love that that God wants to wrestle with us, that He's in that mess with us, which speaks so much to, the incarnation, that He came to be with us in this messy human experience. I wanted to share really quick just how I came to my own awareness of my own discomfort with any kind of deviation from the norm, if you will, when it comes to human sexuality. I had a conversion back to the faith, and I was going to daily mass at this small chapel near where I was in college. And there was a wonderful woman there, and she got to be one of the readers at our mass and for our wedding. And I still write to her. I just love her. I love her so much. She's like an aunt to me. And I remember after, months of forming a friendship and relationship with her, and I say all the time, she's going to be like a straight shot to heaven. She's just like a saint. She approached me after mass and we were chit-chatting, and I kind of had an idea. I thought maybe she has same-sex attraction. I don't know, just kind of appearance and such. And she comes up to me and she's kind of shaking a little bit. And she shares with me, Amy, I have same-sex attraction, and I lived a lesbian lifestyle for a long time, and the Lord really saved me from that and brought me back. And there was a wonderful she happened to encounter a wonderful priest in confession that, affirmed her as a child of God and said, God's not scared of this, and God wants to be with you. God wants to wrestle with you, like you said, through this. And He wants your holiness, and He wants, your purity, and He wants you to be, to help you kind of live chastity in the state that you're called to, regardless of your desires, that you are more than your desire, and I think that's something that as Catholics, we say individuals with same-sex attraction as opposed to someone who is gay, because it just says so much about identity. Your identity is not your desire. Your identity is a child of God. And then your desires are just something that you have. It's not who you are. And I remember leaving that conversation so shaken because I did not know what the church taught. I thought, well, being gay, quote unquote, engaging in homosexual behavior, that's evil, that's wrong, that is not going to lead to heaven. And it sent me down this spiral of learning the truth and the beauty of who God is, God's mercy, and that God wants to meet us, that there's so many different manifestations of our sexual desire that can come about for various reasons, like you've mentioned, a variety of reasons why this can happen. But that God still wants to meet us, and that the end is still the same, that the virtue of chastity is the goal, and that purity of heart is the goal, and that heaven is the goal for everyone, regardless of your sexual desire. So I just wanted to share that for anyone who, hears these topics and feels like, this is really uncomfortable and I don't know what to think or what to do or what to say. And there's someone in my life that I love that has shared this with me, that maybe it's an invitation for you to also be seeking out, like, what is the truth and how can I respond in love? And it just brought me to a new level of confidence that I just feel like, no matter what I hear now, I feel like I'm just unshocked. It's like, well, it kind of join the club. We all got something going on here. So I'm here to kind of walk with you. And it sounds like that's what you do in your practice, is walk with people and help them kind of process things and move towards being fully alive and being free and experience that peace and love of Christ, especially for our teens right now. There's so much that they're struggling with and dealing with different messaging, and then helping their parents. It's just so great, Dr. Sadusky, what the work that you're doing. Feel honored that we were able to have you on tonight to share everything that you have and to be able to share all these resources with people that are listening. So thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome. It's so good to be with you.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you.
Emily, do you have any final questions or anything?
No, I'm just so grateful that you spent time with us and the listeners, and just being able to give us the tools in our tool belt for our kids. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll link to all these books and her website for those of you that are interested. And if you're in Colorado, where are you in Colorado again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so my practice is in Littleton, Colorado, so a little bit south west of Denver.
Okay, so if you're in that general vicinity, you'd have the privilege and honor, I guess, of actually getting in touch with Dr. Sadusky and potentially working with her if you see that you would need that. But if not, there are wonderful people all over doing great things. So finding someone, but to not be afraid to seek that out if that's something that's on your heart. Of, wow, I really want to grow in this area, so I can be, if you're a parent, right, be a better parent to help and heal, so that I can help my children grow in this area. So anyway, I'd love to have you back on in the future, Dr. Sadusky. Thank you again so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It'd be great to come back sometime.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, guys, we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.